Hi, Salam Sejahtera, 早上好. A very warm welcome and good morning to everyone who is joining us today. My name is Faith Ng, and on the screen with me, we have our speaker today, Ms. Dean, and our panelist, Ms. Esther with us. I will introduce the two of them in detail later. So first of all, let me extend a warm welcome and thank you to all our guests today. I believe we have people from all walks of life today across different states, different regions in Malaysia. I believe we have professionals with us, professionals from hospital settings, from residential home settings, from private settings, from private industries, as well as public. We have people who operates or works in a residential home, or even just people who care for someone with swallowing difficulties. So whoever you are, thank you for joining us this morning. And I hope you will have a fruitful learning with us. So as you tuck yourself in for today's session, just allow me to do a brief introduction about what we are doing today and what you could expect from today's session. So as you would see on the screen, today's webinar is the first ever national webinar hosted in Malaysia by the Malaysia IDDSI Reference Group. And if this is your first time hearing about IDDSI, IDDSI, IDDSI stands for International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative. And by saying dysphagia, simply put, it means swallowing difficulties or challenges around eating or drinking. It may be a simple thing that you and I do every day. So if you look at our poster on the screen, we see teh tarik, we see nasi lemak, we see porridge, we see roti canai. But do you know there are some people who can't enjoy this food simply because they have difficulty eating or drinking? And the simple act of eating and drinking may actually bring some risk to their life. And so I believe some of us who join us today, you may be an individual who are experiencing challenges around swallowing. So I hope today's webinar will give all of us some ideas around what we should do and what we can do, no matter where we are from, to help ourselves or to help people around us to eat and to drink safely and to enjoy things that we love. So today's webinar will focus first and foremost the research and the science behind IDDSI. And our speaker will also briefly talk about what exactly eating and drinking difficulties are. What are some of the red flags that we should start keeping a lookout for and do something as early as possible? And we will also touch on food textures and drinks consistencies. Towards the middle and the end of the session, you will get to see some demonstration videos of how we turn delicacies in Malaysia, like roti canai, into different textures so that everyone can enjoy it. And we will also talk about the testing methods. And in today's presentation, you might find that the information is rather an overview of who and what IDDSI are. But don't worry. As long as you join us today, you will be given information and updates about our upcoming webinars. We have 2 more webinars lined up to not just give you an introduction, but to also actually give you practical strategies and methods to modify your foods or your drinks at home and in the settings that you are. So coming back to talk about IDDSI, the Malaysian IDDSI Reference Group is supported by IDDSI Global. And myself, together with Esther, we are the co-leaders and co-founders of the Malaysian group. So the objective of IDDSI really is as simple as ensuring that no matter we are Malaysians or we are from different parts of the world, all of us can achieve safety by using common terminologies for whatever kinds of cuisines, foods, or drinks that we embrace in our culture for people of all ages, in all care settings, and in all cultures. And if you look at the right side, at the right bottom of the screen, this is a snapshot of the IDDSI framework that is supported by very vigorous research and science behind it. And just as a teaser, in webinar 201 that we will launch in the near future, you will actually get to have hands-on experience learning to modify food into different textures and drinks, different kind of drinks, into different thicknesses. So as the start, I would like to take this opportunity to again thank IDDSI Global, the board of directors, for supporting the Malaysian group to set up the reference group over here in this region so that we can really look into the local needs and support all of you here today. So the list on the screen, this is non-exhaustive. It just includes some of the people, the persons and organizations that support the Malaysia IDDSI Reference Group. As you would see, we have the Ministry of Health, different professions from the Ministry of Health, and we have several associations, NGOs, stakeholders, hospitals, teaching hospitals, including private and non-for-profit service operators who support the initiative. So as you sit back and listen and learn from today's webinar, I would also like to extend an invitation to all of you. If you feel that there is something that is of value, that you feel that we could support you or you could work together with us, do feel free to reach out to us via our email, malaysiaallianceidsi.org, or head to our website. There is a specific Malaysia page on the IDDSI Global website where you will find all the information and resources that you will need. So just briefly sharing with you where we are today as a national reference group in Malaysia. Just like what we are doing this morning for the webinar, we are now at the stage of raising and promoting the awareness and education around IDDSI framework to all local key stakeholders. So if you know someone else who will benefit from the content today, do reach out to us via email or leave a message in the chat box, and we will be able to share the recording of today's webinar with you. And do follow us and keep a lookout for future webinars. So after the introduction, I would like to extend our acknowledgements and gratitude to the leadership and the volunteer teams in the IDDSI Malaysia Reference Group, especially the education and training team, as well as the implementation and advocacy team. Yeah, and I would like to also introduce our speakers today, Ms Nurhidaya Din Kamarudin, and our panelist, Ms Esther. So a brief introduction about Ms Nurhidaya Din Kamarudin. Just like Ms Esther and I and many other professionals that are in the volunteer body, Ms Nurhidaya is a senior speech language and swallowing therapist. Currently, she works at Pantai Integrated Rehab Services. And in the past, she worked as a senior speech therapist at Sunway Medical Center. And she was a lecturer at the University Science Malaysia. And some of the qualifications that she holds as she speaks to us today: she holds a Bachelor of Speech Pathology from the University of Science Malaysia and a Master in Speech Difficulties from the University of Sheffield, UK. So, as I say in the beginning, and we have IDDSI Kitty joining us today, sit back, tuck yourself in, grab a cup of coffee, and have fun and enjoy the session today. Throughout the session, please, if you have any questions or any comments, just drop it in the chat box. We will have a Q&A session towards the end. And thank you. I will hand over the time to Ms. Nuruddin, our speaker today. Thank you.
Hi, Faith. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So this short presentation will outline the primary goal behind the creation of the international standards and terminology for dysphagia diets, as well as the evidence-based process used in developing the IDDSI framework and testing methods. In addition, we will review the different levels and the easy testing methods which offer an objective way to ensure individuals with dysphagia are receiving the safest recommended food texture and drink consistency. So in Malaysia, IDDSI is supported by the Malaysian Association of Speech, Language and Hearing MASH, Speech Language Pathologists Association of Malaysia SPEAK, and Malaysian Dietitian Association MDA, University of Malaya Medical Center, University Science Malaysia, as well as University Kebangsaan Malaysia. So we have volunteers from these bodies and associations, professionals working with the MOH, private hospitals, centers, industry, and from the community. We do have a nursing home operator volunteering in our project. And we are expecting more volunteers. So if you are interested in volunteering, you can contact Faith or Esther directly after this webinar. So the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative would like to acknowledge these wonderful sponsors for their continued support. IDDSI is an international not-for-profit organization made up of volunteers, and industry has had no input into development of the framework, publications, or resource materials. So what are we going to do today? So today we're going to talk briefly about swallowing and dysphagia, the background and development of IDDSI, how you can use IDDSI framework and the testing methods at your own test setting, and where you can go for more information. First, we'll spend just a few minutes doing a very simple overview of a typical swallow to make sure that we all know what we are doing here. What you see in this side view are the parts that are involved in swallowing. A typical swallow requires control of the tongue to hold the bolus together and propel the food towards the pharynx. Okay, as you can see in the video here. So as you can see in this swallow, the airway, which is at the front here, it stays protected and the bolus travels safely through the upper esophageal sphincter towards the stomach. Okay, the bolus does not penetrate the airway and there is no residue you can see remains in the mouth or in the throat or pharynx after the swallow. Here is the same view of a typical swallow but using video fluoroscopy, which for those who are unfamiliar, it involves mixing barium with the food or drink that is then swallowed under X-ray. The bolus show up as a dark black form, ball in the mouth and eventually went down. This video shows a solid food being manipulated in the mouth to form a cohesive bolus. So it is important for solid foods to break down the particle size so that it can be safely swallowed. Of course, with liquids, there is no need to chew or to break down the particles. Again, we see here that the bolus is propelled safely and in a controlled way towards the upper esophageal sphincter, avoiding the airway and not leaving residue in the oral cavity or the pharynx. So why do we modify the thickness of liquids? So this video shows an example of the challenges that can arise when someone with a swallowing disorder drinking liquids that flow faster than they are able to manage. So the result is aspiration. That is, as you can see here, the liquid materials enter the airway and goes below the vocal cord and into the lungs. So thickening the liquid may help to slow down the flow and reduce the risk of aspiration. And why do we modify food texture? As you can see in this video, when someone does not chew or have very poor control over the food in their mouth, the entire piece of food can enter the airway and cause an airway obstruction. Okay, these would require emergency intervention if the individual was not able to clear it from the airway. Aspiration and choking or asphyxiation are the key safety issues in children and adults with dysphagia. Specific food characteristics, such as texture, size, and shape, are all associated with increased choking risk. There have been incidents where this was due to misunderstanding and miscommunication with the use of diverse, inconsistent, and sometimes confusing terminology regarding the safest and most appropriate food texture for an individual. So aspiration can lead to pneumonia, requiring hospitalization, and for elderly or compromised individuals, a severe pneumonia can lead to death. Now, think about how you would describe this. How would you tell your patients, family members, healthcare team, food service staff, and kitchen about how to prepare this and check that it is in the correct texture? Or how about describing the thickened liquids? How do we ensure that they are the correct thickness and can be easily checked by those who prepare and use them? So the liquid A here, as well as the liquid B that you see on the screen right now, are both described as nectar, but are they really equivalent? So the primary objective of IDDSI is to improve safety through common terminology for all ages, all care settings, and all culture. So recognizing that terminology and descriptors used for dysphagia diets internationally were so diverse, inconsistent, and presenting a safety concern, an international team of multi-professionals from diverse practice specialties came together to develop an international standard. They are made of speech-language pathologists, dietitians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, physician, nurse, food scientist, and mechanical engineer with a research specialty in rheology. They also span across the whole age spectrum of practice, supporting newborns to the elderly in multiple care settings, including hospitals, long-term care, community or home care, rehabilitation, and clinics. Bringing together the diversity of knowledge and experience, the IDDSI framework was developed in the following way. The process of creating the IDDSI framework was to first assemble an international and multidisciplinary board. IDDSI reviewed existing national standards, including the National Dysphagia Diet Guidelines, the NDD of North America, and other national published standards from around the world, including British, Australian, Irish, and Japanese. They then reviewed existing standards and carried out a systematic review of the evidence for physiological responses to texture-modified foods and thickened liquids. IDDSI circulated a draft framework for consultation and received over 3,000 responses from 57 countries. The final framework was then published in paper in the journal Dysphagia, which is available free open access under the resources section, as well as its systematic review and other publications. This all you can find from the website. So all of this information collected from the global survey and systematic review is what helped create the initial IDDSI framework. So here is the article that can be accessed through the IDDSI website in the resource section under the publication tab. And here is the highlights of the systematic review. So there is evidence that thickening helps those who aspirate thin liquids. There is also evidence that there is such a thing as too thick, where residue begins to accumulate. There is, however, no specific evidence to point to particular rheological values that define the boundaries of effective thickening. So all of this information collected from the global surveys can be accessed from the website. And for texture-modified food, there actually is very little evidence available at this time. But this systematic review did indicate that there is evidence that solid food and thicker consistencies require greater effort in the oral processing and swallowing. So here's the open access publication for the systematic review. It is also accessible through the IDDSI website in the resources section under the publications tab. Since this paper was published, it has been accessed 37,000 times and has been cited in 148 publications. The development of the IDDSI terminology and definitions is documented in this publication, also available through the IDDSI website. IDDSI has endeavored to be inclusive, engaging, and transparent in everything that they do. This is why they have elected to have all publications open access so that anyone can see the process used in the development of IDDSI. Okay, so we've come to the IDDSI framework. So the initial IDDSI framework was first published in 2015. IDDSI's goal was to develop a culturally sensitive, age span relevant framework for classifying texture modified foods and thickened drinks. And to achieve this, as previously mentioned, the board integrated findings from existing practice data, including currently existing dysphagia diet standards, the result of the systematic review, and global survey responses. The draft framework was shared with the global community, and the feedback from this survey was used to inform the final IDDSI framework, which was published in September 2015. The framework and accompanying materials are living documents that will be modified as new research becomes available. For example, the initial level 6 was only described as soft. However, following feedback and board discussion was updated to the current level 6, which is soft and bite-sized. So integrating the findings of existing practice data, the results of the systematic review, and the global survey responses, IDDSI framework that was first published in 2015 was then revised again in August 2016. The framework focuses on texture, irrespective of other factors like nutritional content or taste. It's a standardization of terminology, description, and objective testing methods, not a prescription. Meaning to say that where with past standards, we would have potentially isolated someone to a food and only those textures or thickness levels would have been provided. So IDDSI is used as description of a texture, not a prescription for a person. So the IDDSI framework describes a continuum of levels from 0 to 7, from thin drinks like water to thickened drinks, soft foods, and final level 7 has no restrictions on texture. As you can see here, level 3 and 4 are connected between the food and drinks because the behavior or characteristics of pureed foods is very similar to that of an extremely thick liquids and also liquidized foods, so to that of moderately thick liquids. The levels are numbered, but IDDSI also wanted to define names and high contrast colors for people to use it if they wish. The combination of the 3 identifiers will help to eliminate errors in prescribing, identifying, preparing, and assembling dysphagia diets. So through the whole framework, we have considered cultural and developmental aspects from all corners of the globe as far as possible. So the IDDSI framework was updated again in 2019, adding a new subcategory under level 7 regular. This subcategory is level 7 easy to chew and was added in response to clinician feedback for the need of a category that can be used for individuals who primarily needed softer choices in their diet but who had less choking risk. And thanks to Esther, she has helped to translate all these levels into our Malay language. Okay, so the IDDSI framework was also developed to meet the needs of children, because the goal is to meet the needs of individuals with swallowing difficulties in all cultures, care settings, and all ages. So babies and children have different needs from adults due to their developing eating skills and also their smaller size. Therefore, there are specific levels and criteria designed to meet the needs of the pediatric population. So level 1, slightly thick, may be used for infants with swallowing difficulties, as it will more easily flow through a nipple than the thicker level 2 or 3, thereby reducing sucking effort and fatigue. Level 5, mince and moist, and level 6, soft and bite size, specify different particle sizes for children, reflecting their smaller size and developing chewing skills. And also the transitional foods are used with babies and children as early foods to help develop chewing skills with less risk for choking as they tend to dissolve more quickly in the mouth. Because children grow and develop at different rates, consultation and clinical judgment should be used to guide decision-making for when to transition from children to adult sizing. So with young children, depending on the risk, you can also look at the width of their pinky fingernail to guide sizing of particles, as it is similar to the size of the airway or the airway and trachea. Okay, if you can look at the slide on the right side, you can see those images. So this is to give you an overview of how much trachea diameter changes across the lifespan. So as you can see, at 20 months, it is measured between 4 to 6.5 mm, and it grew all the way to 8 mm by 3 years old. And the size and the trachea continued to grow into adulthood. For adult male, it's measured between 15 to 27 mm, and for adult female is between 13 to 25 mm. So the point is, to minimize choking risk, food pieces must be small enough to pass through rather than blocking the airway. Okay, so where the previous NDD were mostly subjective, IDDSI now provides objective descriptions and measurement techniques, because everyone has their own ideas about the meaning of thick and soft. So IDDSI framework includes standardized measurements for each level. For example, IDDSI has defined the maximum particle size in some levels and liquid thickness in others. Simple, inexpensive, and reliable testing methods were chosen so that they can be used by everyone, recognizing that expensive instruments such as real meters, consistometers, and texture analyzers are not easily accessible because they are more commonly used in research and development or industry. So although it's always possible to perform these tests at bedside, table sites, or other situations, there is no need to test each meal or drink each time it comes out, but you would want to test with a new recipe or batch of food. And it is important to test each of these at other times as well, as part of quality assurance process and operational practice. The tests are most useful for companies to use the tests are most useful for companies to use when developing and when testing their products, to provide guidelines and instructions for local kitchens to develop new recipes, and also when there's a change in supplier. It is also important that you do all this testing when you do initial staff training in preparing dysphagia diets, periodic auditing, as well as teaching family members and caregivers on how to prepare dysphagia diet at home. Okay, testing is recommended testing is the recommended way to ensure that the food texture or drink consistency that is being offered is the correct one that has been recommended following an assessment by a qualified clinician, that is a speech therapist. All right, now let's talk about the IDDSI flow test. So the IDDSI flow test was designed to test the way liquids flow in an objective way. So all that you need is a 10 ml syringe that is 61.5 mm long, because the geometry of the syringe allows for both shear and elongation that more closely matches flow conditions in the oral cavity. So as you can see in the middle of this slide, that's the flow test card. It is a super handy cheat sheet for the flow test instructions, and this is available on the website. Okay, now let's look at the demonstration, a video of how to do the IDDSI flow test. So make sure you have your syringe and your stopwatch ready. You can use your phone for this too. So first, get yourself that syringe, the 10 ml syringe, 61.5 mm long. Remove the plunger, keep it empty. Hold your syringe in this way with one finger, occluding the nozzle, making a seal, and using a different syringe, transfer the 10 ml of liquids that you want to test for this. and then get your stopwatch ready. Okay, once it's reached 10 ml, get your stopwatch ready, release the liquids, and also start the stopwatch at the same time. Okay, wait for the liquid to flow for 10 seconds. Once the time reach 10 seconds, stop the flow and check how much liquids you have left in the syringe. The amount of liquid left in the syringe after 10 seconds will let you know the consistency of the liquids according to its sea level. So in this case, it's at level 1. Easy, right? Okay, so here we can see again the test with levels 1 through 3. Okay, so the level 1 liquid is being tested on the left. Okay, and after 10 seconds, there's about 2 ml remaining, and that puts it into the level 1 category. So level 1 visually appears very thin, and its thickness is difficult to determine with a without a quantitative test. So that's why you need to do this flow test for thin liquids. Okay, and the thicker the liquids, the slower it will flow, and there will be more liquids remain in the syringe and gives a higher IDDSI liquid measurement. At level 3, we will see an overlap between food and drink frameworks. For products like soups and sauces or some nutritional supplements, it could be ambiguous as to whether it is considered a food or a drink. So within the IDDSI framework, that doesn't matter, as it is only concerned with thickness or texture of the product. So if you find you have 10 ml remaining or just 1 or 2 drops after 10 seconds of flow, you would want to move to the IDDSI fork drip test to help you differentiate between level 3 and level 4. So we are moving away from the IDDSI flow test now. So the liquid is considered level 3 if it drips slowly in dollops or strand through the prongs of a fork, like the picture here, when you drag the fork up through the liquid. And you cannot eat a level 3 moderately thick liquid with a fork because it will just drips through. If the sample holds on the fork with the mount above the fork and just a small tail below the fork, like in this picture here, it does not dollop or drip continuously, then it is a level 4 extremely thick or a puree sample. And you can definitely eat a level 4 extremely thick or thick puree with a fork. Okay, so here's an example of a fork drip test for a level 3 moderately thick liquids. As you can see in the video, when you lift the liquid with a fork, it drips between the fork prongs and nothing stays on the fork. So this is a level 3. All right, so for the level 4, at level 4, the food or thickened liquid has very minimal flow, so it's not suitable for IDDSI flow test. So level 4 puree foods or extremely thick drinks are smooth with no particles. I'm just going to repeat that again. It must be smooth, no particle, it has no lumps. Okay, it does not require chewing and must be thick enough to hold its shape on a surface and thick enough to sit on a fork and does not flow through. So level 4 food or drinks must also not be too thick or sticky. Okay, so the spoon tilt test that will be illustrated in the next slide will help to ensure that the food or fluid is not too sticky. So just a quick summary for level 4, you test it with a fork drip test and a spoon tilt test. So this is the spoon tilt test. So individuals with dysphagia may have difficulty controlling and shaping food into a bolus and manipulating sufficiently to ensure the food is moist enough to swallow. So foods should not be sticky or it will leave a residue in the mouth and throat, and that will be hard to clear. The spoon tilt test will give us an objective way to determine if the food is too sticky or not cohesive enough to hold together. So the IDDSI spoon tilt test determines the cohesion, which is ability of the food to hold together, and also the adhesion, which is the stickiness. A spoonful of food should be able to slide off easily when the spoon is tilted or given a gentle flick. and given a gentle flick. So as you can see in the images on the screen, at the top example, the food mounts nicely on the spoon and it slides off easily when given a light flick. And you can see very little residue remains on the spoon. But for the second example, which is the second row, the spoon, when the spoon is flicked, it is very sticky and a lot of the food remains on the spoon. And I think this person needs to flick the spoon more than once for half of the food to leave the spoon. Okay. So this video would show more examples of the spoon tilt test for level 4. So you see how it slides off easily, barely needing a flick, and then this food just, but except for this one. This one is an example when it's too sticky and there's a need to flick the food with more vigor for the mashed potato to leave the spoon. So that one is does not pass the level 4 test. Okay, moving on. We are now at level 5, minced and moist. So at level 5, foods will have small soft particles as well as being moist and cohesive. The size of particles should be no larger than 4 by 4 by 15 mm as in the length of the food for adults and 2 by 2 by 8 mm for children. Particle sizes specified have been found in research which measured the size of particles in a chewed bolus when ready to be swallowed. Okay, but before you reach for your ruler to measure food particles, we have found that the gaps between most table forks is quite consistently approximately 4 mm. So you can just use a fork to measure whether the minced food can pass through the fork, sorry. Okay. IDDSI wanted testing methods that would be applicable for all settings and cultures. So we have tests for forks and we also have fork drip test. So you see no liquids dripping from this food, from this fork. And we also have spoon tilt test. So when you tilt the spoon, the whole bolus just jump off the spoon, leaving nothing behind. And since we are considering all cultures, we also prepared testing methods using chopsticks as well as fingers. So you see when using fingers, you can crush the food easily and none of the food sticking on the fingers, right? So it is important that all the specified tests to be used to check the food. So soft particles squashable with fork, particle sizes that is no larger than specified depending whether a child or a dog, and check the moisture level. You must use a fork drip test to ensure that it's not too thin or liquidy, and the spoon tilt test is used to ensure that the food is cohesive and not too sticky. So for level 5, you use both fork test and the spoon tilt test. Okay, right, we have come to level 6, soft and bite-sized. So at level 6, the two key features are they must be soft and they must be bite-sized. Bite-size is defined no larger than 15 by 15 by 15 mm for adults and 8 by 8 by 8 mm for children. The aim is to minimize choking risk because below that size, food should pass through the tracheal opening rather than getting stuck in the throat. Okay, but soft is a very subjective term. So we have defined it as being able to be crushed or broken down by a tongue pressure. So the fork pressure test is used to determine softness. So it involves using a fork and using just enough pressure to make your thumb blanch white. Okay, this amount of pressure actually is similar to tongue pressure when crushing the food towards the palate, and this will let us know whether or not the food could be easily broken down by the tongue before swallowing. Okay, so for this level, chewing is still necessary. Tongue strength and control needed to move food for chewing and swallowing. And again, food should be easily squashed and does not return to its original shape. Okay, in this video, you can see both, we're doing tests on broccoli. So both broccoli pieces are cut to 15 mm. Okay, when pressure is applied on the first piece, you can see how it can be easily squashed with the frog pressure test. But however, on the second piece, it's not soft enough. It cannot be squashed with the frog pressure test. So it does not pass the frog pressure test. Okay, again, you can do this test with a chopstick. See how the first piece can be easily squashed with a chopstick. So this one pass, can serve to your patient. But the second one, let's see. So with the chopstick, it cannot be squashed, it cannot be crushed, so it does not pass the test. So it's not soft enough. Okay, again, you can also do this test with your fingers, and you can see that with the first piece can be easily squashed using fingers, but when tested, when the second piece is tested, it's too hard, cannot be squashed with fingers, so it does not pass. So beside making sure that the food are the right size, please make sure they are at the right softness level. Okay. We have come to level 7. So easy to chew level 7 is a subcategory of regular level 7. So this subcategory was introduced following global request to have a category for softer foods for people who have mild issues with oral processing or show slight fatigue during chewing. This level is not recommended for people who are at risk of suffocation due to incomplete chewing. Due to incomplete chewing, or when they take too large a bite, or when they eat too quickly. Okay, so normal everyday food that is soft and tender and developmentally and age appropriate are part of the easy to chew food. You can serve these. Chewing is necessary. They can use any method to eat this food. There's no restriction on particle size. It does not include any hard, tough, chewy, or food with seeds, bones. This type of food cannot be served. It may or may not include dual consistency or mixed consistency food. So a mixed consistency food is defined as food that have both solids and liquids. For example, your bihun soup. So you have the solid bihun and the liquid soup. So you need a person who's eating mixed consistency. They have to have a very good skill because they need to swallow the soup, but at the same time chew the bihun. Okay, so the fork separation tests and fork pressure tests are used to determine whether the food is soft enough and can be broken down easily. So you can use the side of the fork to cut down the food to check whether they are soft enough. And once they are cut into smaller pieces, you can use the fork pressure test to check the softness by pressing it down and check whether your thumbnail turns to blanch to white when you squash the food. So you need to use the fork separation test and also fork pressure test for this one. Okay, finally, we have come to level 7, regular. So regular would include any food with no restrictions. So for children, it would be regular foods that are appropriate for their development. So there's no restriction in particle sizes. It can include all textures. So mixed consistency can be served. Chewing is necessary. Tongue strength and control are needed to move food for chewing and swallowing. Okay, so earlier we did mention about transitional food when we were looking at the IDDSI framework for kids. So transitional foods are the type of food that starts as one texture, which is solid, and change to another when moisture is applied, like saliva, water, or temperature change occurs. So for this type of food, minimal chewing is required. Tongue pressure may be sufficient enough to break down the food after alteration in moisture and temperature. So transitional foods are often used for developmental teaching, like teaching the children to chew and swallow, and also for rehabilitation of chewing skills. So it's part of development for children, and also it can be used for adults with dysphagia. So some of the example of the transition food that you can find out there is baby bites, the baby biscuits, any puffs, wafers, potato chips that can dissolve easily. So you can think of other things that are considered transitional food when you have your lunch later. There are also other videos on IDDSI testing methods on the IDDSI YouTube channel. So you can head to IDDSI YouTube channel later, subscribe, and you can watch the videos if you need some guidelines on how to prepare level 5, level 6, for example, sandwiches for your patients. So you can go to the website and go through the videos and find the resources. Okay, so we've come to a very interesting part, Malaysian food. Okay, so Malaysians, we are very well known for our immense love and our pride in our very own Malaysian food. And we know Malaysia have a variety of food, and we have so much food that we love and simply cannot give up. Even when we travel abroad, we keep thinking about our Malaysian food. And sometimes we go purposely find a Malaysian restaurant overseas just because we miss our Malaysian food. So we want to get everyone to think with us about whether some of our Malaysian food are suitable to be modified and be served to our dysphagic patients. Because like Faith mentioned earlier, what we normally eat may be difficult for these patients, and they are craving for food. Malaysians crave for the Malaysian food. So I had a lot of patients who asked even for a spoonful of food because they miss eating. But I've been seeing other patients from other countries. They are not so they don't have great love for food like us. So I think it's important that we consider, start to think what food we can modify, how we can modify our food, and how to prepare them, and how to check whether they are following the IDDSI standards and requirement before we serve our food to the patient. Okay, so I'm gonna play some video examples that contributed by our volunteers. Thank you, Wayun Jin, Norafika and her team, as well as Dr. Hannah and the UKM team for the videos contributions. So this video, from these videos, you can see how we can modify some of our Malaysian food to different IDDSI levels, and how to test them using the fork grip test, spoon tilt test, whether they are the right consistency. So this is a great example by Wai Yun Shin. So you see how after she prepared the level 4 pumpkin puree, she tested the puree consistency using the spoon tilt test as well as the fork grip test. Good job on Yun Shin. So this is another video on food preparation from level 6 to level 5, I think eventually to level 4. So using our favorite roti canai. So the 15 mm is also is said to be similar to the size of a thumbnail. So you can go and check the size of your thumbnail. Yeah, so it's the easiest way to check whether the food particles are of the right size. So you see it can be easily squashed with a fork. It doesn't return to its original form. So it should be soft enough. So for level 6, you need to test with the fork grip test. See how the particles is about 4 mm in size. It can fit in between the fork prongs. So actually you need to test the food before you mold it. So it needs to pass the fork grip test and also the spoon tilt test before you serve to your patient. So no liquid escape from this mound of food on the fork. slide off easily from the spoon. So make sure that you all pass this test before you serve to your patient. So the USM team has also prepared this video available in Mandarin, Chinese, and also in Bahasa Melayu. So maybe we can contact the USM team before after this presentation. Okay. Okay, before I play this next video, I just want to say that this is actually a good attempt to modify kway teow soup. However, please note that actually for kway teow soup, it falls under level 7, regular, because it's a mixed consistency. It can be served to level 7, easy to chew if the patient is deemed safe to take this consistency by the speech therapist that is assessing the patient. So, I just want to highlight there are some parts that can be improved, and I want everybody who will watch this video to think together how we can improve this video in terms of preparing it safely according to the IDDSI standards before we serve to our patients. So actually easy to chew is at level 7, and at level 6 it's soft and bite-sized. And like I said earlier, mixed consistency is a bit tricky. And for level 7, you don't need to cut the food or prepare in a specific way because it can be your everyday food. Okay, for puree, it has to be smooth, no lumps. So when you blend the food, make sure that you blend it until they become smooth, no lumps. Liquidized diet should be runny, but it must pass the test, the IDDSI flow test, as well as the fork drip test. So once you pour it into a bowl, you must check for the IDDSI, for using the IDDSI flow test as well as the fork drip test. So this should be fork pressure test, fork separation if it's easy to chew, fork separation and fork pressure test. This one, like I said, it's a bit lumpy. It passed a fork drip test, but I would love to see it tested using the IDDSI flow test. Okay, so the IDDSI website is actually the best source for most updated information, resources, and ideas for implementing IDDSI in your setting. All the resources can be found on the resources tab. All IDDSI resources are free to download and use, but so please visit and explore the IDDSI website to see what is available. However, when you're using the IDDSI resources in part or in whole, please use the Creative Commons citation to acknowledge the source and cite the necessary sources. So this information is all available on the website. Actually, industry partners from around the world are also now using IDDSI on their labeling. As you can see from these images, you can see moderately thick, mildly thick. So yeah, so it's being accepted in the world. And for those who wish to have IDDSI on the go, the IDDSI app is now available for both iOS and Android devices. So please visit the iOS App Store or Google Play Store to download the free IDDSI app. The descriptors and videos are all available within the app. And the best part is you don't need a Wi-Fi or data to use it. This means you can use it whenever, wherever, to talk about IDDSI with people. You can stay in touch with IDDSI through the eBite. That's where you can find out about upcoming webinars, new resources, implementations, ideas from others around the world, and so much more. Okay, So any questions? Again, I would like to acknowledge the sponsors who have helped to support IDDSI. So back to you, Faith.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean.
Sorry, I need to stop this, I know.
Not a problem at all. And to everyone, we are starting to get some questions from the public, as well as people whom I believe are professionals or caregivers. So feel free to head down to the Q&A button. It should be in the function bar where the symbol for the mic, for mute, and the video are. So you can drop any questions or comments. And as the questions come in, I believe Ms. Esther will first show us again another very useful videos that I personally think now that we are heading into noontime, the more I watch it, I'll start to feel hungrier. So enjoy the video and then we'll come back to answer some questions before we wrap up the session. Thank you, Esther. Hi, Esther. I'm sorry to interrupt. It seems like I can't hear the sound of the video. Thank you. Do you reckon we could watch it again from the start? There are some really useful and important content, I believe. Thank you so much. Thank you, Esther. Thank you for the wonderful videos and all the wonderful contents and practical strategies and knowledge that has been shared by our speaker and panelists today. We have several questions in the Q&A. So let's open the floor, and I think let's start with some questions from the public. So this would be from a non-professional perspective. So to our speaker and our panelists today, the first question is, I feed my mom every day. Under what circumstances? And how can I know if she is swallowing the food into the stomach or into the wrong way, which is the lungs? So I think to rephrase the questions, the public is asking, what are some of the red flags, signs, or symptoms as a layperson that we should keep a lookout for, that a person is having difficulties eating or drinking? Over to you, Ms. Dean and Ms. Esther.
Yeah, let me answer this question. So there are some signs and symptoms that are overt or obvious that you can see when a person eats or drinks. So some of the signs include coughing when drinking or eating during meal times. So wet voice, shortness of breath, taking a long time to finish food. Actually, a study have been conducted on meal times. Actually, a person would spend a maximum of 30 minutes, actually 29 minutes to be exact, for them to finish a meal. So if a person takes a very long time to finish their meal or a small bowl of porridge, that's a clear red flags that eating is not efficient, is not safe, and it's not enough for the patient, because after 30 minutes you start to burn calorie, you start to get tired, the risk of food going to the airway is even higher. So if you find a person or you heard about someone needing 2 hours to finish their food, that's not a good sign. But again, I would like to highlight that the importance of a speech language therapist assessment in managing cases. So if you find, you're not sure, you can go to, example, the MASH website to find the nearest professional speech therapist to contact and have a chat with one of us. And other than that would be weight loss, that a person is eating but is not gaining weight, and always having fever, on and off fever, very chesty, a lot of phlegm. So these are red flags that the person is having swallowing problems. Okay.
Thank you. And a similar question that is rather general, and this is from Ivy Chia. Do all textured modified foods need to be non-spicy? Do we need to be concerned about spice level in the preparation of these foods? Over to our speaker and panelists. Thank you.
Okay, so if you, in the presentation earlier, I did mention that IDDSI is concerned about preparing the right texture, the right size, the right consistency, not focusing on flavor, taste or spiciness, as well as the nutrition content. So it doesn't really matter. If a person likes spicy food, you can prepare a spicy puree that would interest that person. Yeah, so yeah, should be fine. But again, go back to whether, medically, if the person shouldn't be on spicy food, that's a different story. But if we talk about preparing for dysphagia diet, taste, spiciness isn't a concern. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And we have, yes, very helpful. And we have 2 to 3 more questions that are from the public. So there's one from, pardon me if I don't pronounce correctly, from Lajrina. What if a patient is on thickened fluids? What would be the best way to go about meals with soups, such as kway teow soup, dal curries, etc., which are a favorite in Malaysia?
So this is a bit tricky because if it's a mixed consistency like kway teow soup, I wouldn't recommend. Yeah. So, but if the person is craving, you can thicken up the soup to the correct consistency level as recommended by the speech therapist. But I wouldn't recommend feeding the soup and the kway teow together in one spoon, because like I've mentioned earlier, for mixed consistency, you need to have a skill to just swallow the soup, but at the same time chew the solids. So if a person is deemed unsafe to be on mixed consistency by the speech therapist, I wouldn't recommend to give it. So always consult the speech therapist. The speech therapist will check, assess whether it's safe, and if it isn't safe, what is the best way to feed this person their favorite food safely without compromising their health. So yeah, go back to your speech therapist.
Yeah, it's just want to add up on that answer actually. One of the way, but you need to check this with speech therapist first lah. One of the way is feeding the patient alternately. Like the first spoon, you may feed the patient with the solids first, like a kway teow, according to a safe consistency, and then alternate it with the liquid. But again, you need to check which level of consistency that the patient can tolerate first lah, with the speech therapist before giving this type of food to patients. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, and I think a few questions from the floor today. If there's any doubts or any further queries, do go back to, if you already have access to a speech language therapist or pathologist, to go back to them, or if you don't, you can head to the Malaysian Association of Speech, Language and Hearing website to access the directory of service, or just speak to your healthcare professionals and consult them about referral to someone who is qualified and who is able to support your swallowing. Just before I go to another few more questions around food preparation and drinks thickness, from among the floor, I see Susan, you raise your hand. Please feel free to drop your comment or questions in the chat box or Q&A. I will keep a lookout. Thank you. So back to our speaker and panelists, we have a question here about, I think we spoke about food just now. So someone, Karini Kaur, asked about drinks. The question is, what is the best thickener to prescribe to clients in Malaysia? I am an SLT, a speech language therapist who used to work in the UK and always recommended this thickener called Resource Thicken Up Clear, but that is not available in Malaysia. So to add on to this question, I think it would be helpful for be it professionals or from the public. If we were to access a thickener, of course, best under the consultation of a speech language therapist, perhaps what brands or what resources are available in Malaysia? Over to you.
Okay, I think I'll try to answer this because I've been sourcing out thickeners for quite some time. So actually, the mostly available thickeners out there in the world are either gum-based thickeners, which is like the Thicken Up Clear, is made of santan gum, and also another one is starch-based thickener made of cornstarch like Thixa or Thick and Easy. But Thick and Easy also have both cornstarch base and also gum-based thickeners. So they did a research on thickeners, and they found that actually gum-based thickeners is safer in the sense that their consistency lasts longer, and they don't change their consistency when in contact with saliva, unlike the cornstarch-based thickeners. So the gum-based thickener is more stable. So even if a patient cannot finish their drink in one go, they can continue drinking after a while. But for cornstarch base, after a while, they would change consistency. You have to add up. Or if the patient has a lot of saliva in their mouth, over time, and they keep the thickened liquids in their mouth for quite some time, over time, the saliva will change the consistency of the thickened liquids that is thickened using a cornstarch base, and it will become runny again, and the patient will cough on the water. So unfortunately, in Malaysia, it's quite hard to get the gum-based thickeners. So far, there's only one brand that I found. It's called Toromi. I've tried contacting Nestle to bring in their own resource and all, but they're not keen. I've also contacted those who imported Hormel to bring in the Hormel thickeners. They also don't want to bring in the gum-based thickeners. I think it's because of the price, but actually the amount of thickeners you need to thicken using a gum base is lesser compared to cornstarch-based thickeners. So you save a lot using gum-based. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of options. We have the Toromi. If Karini, if you're interested, we can give you a contact number of someone to call. Yeah, I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you. And I hope this also answered another question from the floor that says, is it suitable to use cornstarch to thicken food or drinks, or is there any better alternative? So I believe our speaker has answered this. For the benefits of the public or non-professionals, could I invite our speaker and panelists to perhaps write the names of the recommendations that you have just mentioned in the chat box, just as a recap for anyone who missed the information, and should you wish to do further research and sourcing on the recommended thickener. Thank you. And before we go to the next questions, we have one of the volunteers and leaders in the Malaysia IDDSI Reference Group, Dr. Nurhidaya, who is also a dietitian. Just going back to the question about whether we should serve spicy food. So this is her response. In hospital settings, generally texture modified foods normally are non-spicy, based by the diet manual, mainly because of the concern that foods that are spicy or too spicy might induce sudden cough reflex. But I think at home, it can be based on individual tolerance. And thank you. And we do recognize that, even though we only hear from speech language therapists today, the volunteer body in Malaysia comprises of a wide range of professionals who work together as a team. So that includes dietitians, occupational therapists, food service officers, nurses, doctors, etc. So in the same aspect, to our speaker and panelists, we have few questions here. In the interest of time, I will compile them together. They are all related. I think if there's any dietitians with us today, you can feel free to add on your comments in the chat. Yeah. We have someone who asks, does sensory appearance or food presentation could help patients' appetite and consumption process? So whether having changing the food presentation and sensory appearance would perhaps help with the appetite and consumption. So that is one question. And also something related to the nutrition by a dietitian that says, how do we make sure that after we modify food and drinks, we also make sure we keep the same nutritional value or the content? And how do we make sure that the nutritional adequacy of those modified diet are being examined and confirmed? So over to you, whether it's our speaker or our panelists. Thank you. Perhaps shall we start with the question about sensory appearance and how we present our food that are modified?
So presentation, actually in overseas, they use special powder to shape the food. So they put the food in a nice shape that will look like puree. Steak will look like steak until the patient starts to eat the food. Same goes with their broccoli and their carrots. So it needs a special powder, which is unfortunately not available in Malaysia. I think in Malaysia, there's a lot of issues you need to consider before bringing in something quite tough, I think, because of the halalness and all. That's why some of the thickness, the gum-based thickness, are not easily brought in because of the halal certification. And yeah, the shaping, yeah, if we could have that powder and shape our patients' food, I think they'll be more interested in food, in their food. It looks more appealing. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you talk about sensory appearance or food presentation, you need to think back about the process of swallowing, process of eating actually. So we start eating, our swallowing phase. We have the first phase is, most of the time people will tell us that the oral phase is the first phase, but actually we have the pre-oral phase before we even start putting the food into our mouth. So this pre-oral phase, we have the anticipation of the food, and of course the sensory appearance, even the smell of the food, even while we start cooking, right? Actually, we already started to stimulate our sensory, preparing us for eating already. So in clinical settings, we can actually apply this in our rehab process, especially patients with dementia. Most of the time they have desensitized, like some of them, they lose the what we say needs or the anticipation process of eating. So actually one part of the rehab is to start to present all the sensory, even the smell, the appearance, and we even suggest to present the food with colored plate or specific cutleries for them, just to stimulate them, to prepare them to eat. Yeah, so it does sensory stimulation, sensory appearance, and presentation. It is important in feeding patients with dysphagia. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Esther. And I would like to invite one of our dietitians volunteers, Dr. Nurhidaya, to share with us and to enlighten us on some of these questions related to nutrition. So let me just recap. We have a few questions about once we modify the food and in different textures, does that affect the nutritional values? And if yes, how does that affect? And how do we ensure that patients are still getting the nutrients that they need? And also we have questions from another dietitian asking, what about the use of thickener? Because it is said that it will cause dehydration. And how common is thickening fluid being used in Malaysia, since sometimes we might put them on a nasogastric tube, a tube that sends food or nutrients straight away down to the stomach instead of through the mouth for those with swallowing difficulties. So over to you, Dr. Nurhidaya. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Faith. Maybe I'll answer the question about food presentation. My group has just published a study regarding texture modified food and how much this food is being wasted in hospital level. And we found out that for texture modified food, the plate waste is around 50%, and out of those, pureed diet was wasted at 65%. And yes, one of the reasons was because of appearance, other than, of course, these patients were hospitalized patients, but we cannot deny that presentation is one of the aspects. What we are trying to do now in terms of trying to reduce plate waste, and at the same time trying to make sure that hospitalized patients on texture modified food will can have a better nutritional status is by introducing molded food as what has been introduced previously by the speaker. Yes, it's very new in Malaysia. I believe we are the first group to try this out, where we try to offer patients specifically prescribed with pureed diet, molded pureed food, okay, with sources that are very local. So we are still in the middle of testing it. So hopefully we'll be able to share more about this study very soon. And for the second question about, when we modify texture, well, the nutrient content, what happened to the nutrient content? Yes, there will be modification, especially as we move more towards aggressively or extremely modified the texture. When we go, especially from level 3 to level 3 to level 4, when we want to puree something, we need to introduce liquid. Okay. Most of us, when we introduce liquid, what do we use? We use water, we use broth, which is the calorie is not really high. A simple thing, if you can imagine, is when we compare a patient on normal diet where they receive rice, maybe chicken, vegetable, and then with a patient who is receiving maybe mixed porridge. Okay, porridge, the volume is big, but the nutrient might not be as dense as if we are receiving normal diet. So we have to be very, very careful when we are doing texture modified diet. So there are few factors. There are few ways. For example, if we want to blend, we can use liquid that has more nutrition. For example, in one of the videos about curry chicken, okay, if we use coconut milk, then of course it has a higher content. I'm not saying about it's bad, whatever, but if you are just looking at calorie wise, that is one of the sources of calorie, and at the same time it introduces a lot of flavors. Rather than we are just using a broth or like water. Other than that, what we can do is maybe if we are pureeing dessert or something, we can use milk. Some other strategies for patients on texture modified food, texture modified diet, especially those who are on extensively modified diet, we might need to introduce few strategies. For example, a small and frequent meal. Okay, we need to feed them more frequently to make sure that we achieve the target. Need to introduce more snacks in between, and if the nutrition requirement cannot be met at this point, the use of oral nutritional supplementation might be needed. Yes, I have to agree that we don't have any like oral nutrition supplement that is thickened, ready to drink. But I think we might need to use a thickener in this sense. And for the last question about the use of thickener, at kitchen level, we will just send food, okay? But we will pack the thickener normally and send to ward, but we don't normally thicken at a kitchen level. So I think it should be, for those patients who really need thickened fluid, caregivers, family members has to make sure that they receive, okay? Because if you thicken 250 ml of fluid, even though the consistency is thickened, but it is still 250 ml, fluid. Okay, so just make sure that we give patients the required liquid. If it needs to be thickened, then it has to be thickened. Okay, I think that's all from me, Faith.
Thank you so much. That is so helpful. Thank you, Dr. Nurul.
Hi, can I just add on the question about thickened liquids being prescribed and whether it's tolerated and causing dehydration? So
Yes,
actually,
please.
not every patient who is coughing on water, we give them thickener. So a lot of things need to be considered because thickener itself is not always safe. So when a speech therapist assess a patient, they will also assess cough reflex, because if a patient aspirated on thickened liquids, it will be very hard for them to cough out compared to thin liquids. So a lot of things will need to be considered by a speech therapist before they prescribe a thickened liquids for a patient. And also, as you have asked about dehydration, a lot of patients, they don't like thickened liquids. So when they don't like thickened liquids, they don't drink enough. So when they don't drink enough, it can cause dehydration, and and sometimes it can cause constipation because of the starch in the thickened liquids. So so if it's not tolerated, the speech therapist will sit down and review and find a way to feed the patient liquids safely and preventing aspiration. Yeah, so a lot of things need to be considered. So you have to, whatever it is, you have to go back to the speech therapist. And from my experience, not all patients who fail FEES test always put on NGT. So because during the FEES test, the speech therapists and the doctors will test on different consistencies. So if let's say they are safe on thickened liquids, they will be allowed thickened liquids rather than, given thin liquids. So so yeah, you need to go back to the speech therapist. Okay.
And I need to highlight that FEES is not about fail or pass. FEES is about finding the best way, the best compensatory techniques, and the diagnosis of the patient, so we can move forward to our rehab plan later. Yeah.
Yeah, and if a patient is on thickened liquids, it doesn't mean they have to be on that liquid forever, because like Esther mentioned, with rehab, we will help patients to improve their swallow function and try to go back to their old diet. Okay.
Thank you so much. I think it is very informative, in helping those who may or may not necessarily work or have experience treating or supporting or caring for someone with swallowing difficulties, to have an overview idea of what happened in a healthcare setting, as well as when someone transitioned back to their home or the community. So to our speaker and our panelists, just one final question that I believe will benefit everyone, regardless of our background, is from Chen Chiu In. Is thickener safe for children with swallowing problems above 2 years old?
So yeah, thickener is safe for children who have swallowing difficulties above 2 years old, definitely. So but again, we have limited options. There's a type that's called gel mix that's available in UK that is allowed for children, I think after 6 months of age, and once they reach 42 pounds, if I'm not mistaken, 40. A certain weight and certain age suitable for the patient. So you have to check the product. They will let you know whether it's safe or not. But generally, if a patient, a 2-year-old, having problem with swallowing and is safe on thickened fluids, then a speech therapist may suggest thickened liquids. Again, go back to the speech therapist.
And I think you need to check with the primary physician, primary care team, if the child has any allergens or allergics to any type of thickener first, before prescribing this thickener to the child.
And we have final 4 questions, but don't worry if anyone you have further queries or questions after this. On my screen, we have our email address. you can please feel free to send your questions in, and we will try to get not just our speaker, our panelists, but also we have a big group of practitioners, professionals in the Malaysian IDDSI Reference Group. I think moving forward, we will try our best to categorize some of these questions and respond to you on an individual basis. So to Ms. Dean and Ms. Esther, in the chat box, there are 3 final questions that I believe are quite specific about the testing methods, which we will touch on in detail with the practical session in webinar 201. So could I just ask if you'd like to briefly touch on any of these 3 questions before we wrap up the session today? So in the chat box, as everyone could see from Elvis, Elvis is asking, is there any different classification?
I think the last question might be applicable to me, because I think there must be from the dietetic or packing officer side.
Sure.
If I may clarify.
Yes.
Blended diet. I know. Actually, the good thing about IDDSI, because it urged us from the surgeon, dietetic surgeon, to transform. Okay, because our diet manual, I know what we have for texture modified diet is pretty simple. We do have like mince, we have like chincang mince blended, but it's not specified. So what we are trying to do while we do this webinar is first to create awareness, and the next step, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but we are going to match, right? I'm going to match our current practice to the IDDSI level. So from my observation, yes, some of the levels are it's not up to what we have been practicing. It's a little bit different from IDDSI. For example, mince and mice, in IDDSI it's level 3, but in kitchen setting, when we talk about diet chincang, it's level 5 actually. Okay, sorry, mince and mice is level 5, okay, but diet chincang or mince diet at kitchen level is level 6, the soft and bite size. So that's why it has to be aligned. We will slowly, if you are a dietitian or catering officer, worry not, we are working on this. We're going to have a CD soon with dietitians and catering officer. Will spread the awareness how we are going to adopt IDDSI. And for blended diet, according to IDDSI, blenderized or liquidized is 3. Okay, if we look at our diet manual, our blended diet says it should be thick, which the description, if we try to match it with IDDSI, it is like level 4 puree. Okay, but in IDDSI, blended, or it's like liquidized. Okay, it's level 3. So I would say at this level, if you try to match, you will see that there is mismatch. Okay, there is mismatch. Our blended, our practice at hospitals, some hospitals blended can be level 4, blended can be level 3. So it's not standard. Hopefully, when we adopt IDDSI, it's going to be standardized. Whatever our speech therapist is ordering for the patient, if they ask for level 4, we give level 4. If they ask level 3, we can definitely give level 3, because at this point, I think the most problem is level 4, level 3. Okay, our diet kisar, because we don't really have like diet puri, or at this point we slashed it. I mean, it's like diet kisar / puri. Okay, but actually it's different. Okay, it's different. Some kitchen might prepare very runny, and they call it puri still, or they call it diet kisar still, or they but it's not. Okay, so the last question about clear fluid. So here there is a separation between texture modification and also MNT, okay, medical nutrition therapy. From the from the texture modified site, clear, there's no clear fluid. They just have fluid with different levels. Okay, but from MNT side, why do we need clear diet? If you're a dietitian or you're a personal officer, we have, what are the diagnoses that require a clear fluid diet. So even for clear fluid diet, actually, technically it can also be at different level. But normally, from our side, what we know about clear fluid, normally we'll just give like thin fluid. Okay, so I hope that I give some information, and for us at dietetic and food service, I think it is the way to go. We'll work together, we'll spread awareness to our hospitals, our practice settings, and we hope to be able to work together with our speech therapists so that we give them what they ordered accordingly for the best of our patients and clients. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nurhidaya. And I think you have also inspired us. After today's session, we may go away with more questions, but I also hope that we'll go away with some motivations to continue doing the good work that each of us are doing, no matter where we are and whether we are a professional. So before I wrap this session out, can I just ask our speaker and panelists whether you have any final remark for our attendees today? Let's start with Ms. Dean.
Okay. All right. So I think despite whatever term that you've used before, I think it's best to, now we are adopting IDDSI, it's best to go to IDDSI. So like just now the question about blended, yeah, you can blend anything, but you have to go back to the testing to know whether they're a level 3 or level 4 that is safe for your patient. Because at the end of the day, you know what's safe for your patient. And I did training for my kitchen staff and dietitian, so it's something that you can also do if you want to implement in your setting. Or sometimes when I call the kitchen staff, I just explain to them, I want it in this, I want the food to be cut this way. If they don't know it, yet, I just say, I want everything in this size. And then I always check the food, and the nurses, teach the nurses how to check the food before serving to the patient. Yeah, so go back to IDDSI because we are implementing IDDSI in the future. If you have concern, questions, you can always go back to Faith, Esther, and any of the MYIRG members, and we will try our best to answer all your questions.
Yeah, so this first national webinar is a good start for us to adopting IDDSI in Malaysia. So hopefully in the future, we can fully adopt this IDDSI in our country, in every hospital or healthcare centers. Yeah, so feel free to email us additional questions after this. Thank you. Back to your Beth, yeah.
Thank you so much, Esther and Dean. And to wrap this session up, we actually have one question that came in the first, which asks, which local hospitals have already adopted IDDSI in their patient food service? So as a start today, I will answer this question by saying that you will be surprised that actually many government hospitals, teaching hospitals, even universities at the education and teaching level, and even in private practices. So practices ranging from hospitals to clinic to community services. Actually, many professionals and even caregivers, they are aware of the IDDSI framework. So that is why the Malaysia IDDSI Reference Group is established to pull together our resources, our efforts. As you would have heard from our speakers, panelists, and Dr. Nurhidaya representing the dietetics and the food service just now. The ultimate objective of the IDDSI Reference Group is to unify and really join efforts in making safe practices for those with swallowing difficulties in Malaysia by means of using standardized terms for food textures and drinks thickness. So if you are someone who is looking for services or advice, I would encourage you to go back to your healthcare practitioners and I will encourage you to just ask them how familiar or they are or experienced they are with adopting the IDDSI framework. So start the conversation from there. And if you need any further support or queries, do feel free to email us. And please go to the chat box just before you make a move for your lunch. We would love to keep in touch with you and to keep you posted about our upcoming webinars, whereby we will again go deep into the testing methods that you will have seen, the syringe, the fork test, the spoon tilt test, etc. So we have a practical sessions hopefully by then and be able to show you how to modify exactly more local cuisines, foods and drinks that you and I enjoy after this during lunch and on a daily basis. Yeah, so thank you again. Thank you to our speaker, our panelists, our volunteers who contribute your comments and your ideas. Thank you to all professional attendees and also thank you to the public for joining us in this informative session. Please fill in the Google form before you go. And I wish you a happy weekend and enjoy your food later. And as you eat and as you drink, you may start to think about creative and safe ways to modify your food and the drinks for someone who may struggle to enjoy that. Thank you. And we hope to see you again in the next webinar. Keep in touch with us.